South Africa needs to free itself from the chains of Twitter. Well, X, or the dark place formerly known as Twitter. And when I talk about South Africa, I specifically mean South African media, which is absolutely enslaved to that platform in a way that often causes it to report on small things that happen on Twitter that are just not actually that big, but report on it as though it is the whole country's news. And then because the media is reporting on it as though it is the whole country's news, the whole country consumes the media and then experiences small minor ructions, propaganda, bots, disinformation, or fringe political beliefs as huge political beliefs. So this is the issue with Dan Corder. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. This is the issue with South African media's addiction to Twitter. And just in case you still don't know, we have a weekday news worth knowing podcast about South Africa and South Africans called Dan Corder in the Morning. It's one of the top 5 most listened to podcasts in the country, and you can listen to it for free on Spotify or Apple or anywhere else, wherever you get your podcasts. From Monday to Friday morning, we give you an episode per day on all of the biggest news worth knowing unfolding in South Africa. And we also have a WhatsApp line, because the point of the podcast is for you to participate, send in messages, record voice notes, and be part of the dialogue of the podcast community that we have built. So go find the podcast. Chat to you soon there. All right, to properly understand the bad addiction that South African media has with the dark place formerly known as Twitter, we need to understand 2 things. 1, what Twitter was and what it has become, and 2, how the South African media industry has been hollowed out in recent years and journalism in this country has become unbelievably hard to do. So let's start with Twitter. When it came along nearly 2 decades ago now, it seemed like this magical place where you could go, and it was designed to encourage dialogue and the trade of and swapping of information, mainly through text in 140 characters. They got audio and video later, but Twitter basically became this town square where all kinds of people would go to talk with each other, debate ideas, and release information. And by all kinds of people, I critically mean some of the most powerful, influential people in the world. Politicians, high-ranking business people, culture leaders, religious leaders, and crucially, journalists. And so for many years, Twitter was the place where you would go to find out what a politician thought about something, where you would go to read the breaking news investigations of some of the best journalists, and where you would see the world's most prominent political and business analysts debating about what was going on in the world. And so Twitter naturally became an incredibly influential social media platform in the world's media, because the media was participating on Twitter, and because the people the media was interested in were also participating on Twitter. And that's how we got into the media ecosystem around the world that we have now, where you often see major media houses reporting screenshots of tweets or X's or posts or whatever they are now, where you have whole news media reports on some of the biggest TV channels in the world just about Twitter threads, and in the most extreme circumstances where Twitter threads are now being turned into whole movies. Twitter was always a relatively small place, far fewer users than, say, Instagram, Facebook in particular, and TikTok, but it had this outsized influence on the world because of its importance to the media world and to journalists. And then Elon Musk came along and bought Twitter, and now it's the dark place formerly known as Twitter. And he said that what he was going to do was rip it open so that free speech could happen, because he was really angry with a lot of the Twitter moderation policies that removed bigots, disseminators of disinformation, liars, propagandists, and also just people spreading hate. And he claimed that he had a problem with that, and he wanted Twitter to be an absolute free speech place. And that is absolutely not what has happened. Elon has got rid of most of the moderation platforms on Twitter and the moderation teams, but he has still platformed and allowed back onto the platform a lot of haters and bigots, which might sound like free speech until you learn that Twitter has also removed or shadow banned and pushed down a lot of voices who criticize Elon or dislike Elon Musk. And the algorithm now prioritizes Elon and friends of Elon above almost all else as they peddle a lot of disinformation, a lot of right-wing propaganda, and a lot of conspiracy theories. What's also happened, ironically, since Elon bought Twitter, because one of Elon's big problems with Twitter is he claimed that it was overrun by bots, which are anonymous accounts that are sometimes literally run by machines, by software programming to get them to push certain agendas or tweet certain positions as though they were real people, and thereby, hopefully, from the bot manager's perspective, hopefully convince normal people on the internet that their bots are real people who really think these things, and therefore push and platform different positions of those bots. Ironically, the bot use on Twitter has spiked enormously since Musk bought and ran the platform. In fact, millions to hundreds of millions of the accounts on Twitter are either inactive or they are bots with no measurable evidence on them of being real human beings at all. And so now Twitter is a really hateful place full of disinformation and bigotry and piles and piles and piles and piles of anonymous accounts who, again, could just be cowards, individual cowards on the internet, or they could be bots. And so many of them are bots, where if you go and look at the accounts, they've got like no one following their profile, they suddenly come into existence, they suddenly tweet or retweet only certain positions and beliefs. There's more than enough data research from around the world from many different analysts and researchers about how bots are controlling the platform. And what that means is bot programs and networks are being used to push positions that not a lot of people have. But if you use lots of bots, then what you can do is manipulate the platform to make it look like lots of people have those positions. You can get certain hashtags to trend with very few posts relatively. If you've just got enough bots behind them, you can push something to the top of the newsfeed on Twitter or the trending feed on Twitter. And then suddenly the normal people using the platform, if they don't have enough time to go and investigate all of these trends and hashtags, may think, wow, that is a really big belief and position, because a lot of people have tweeted about it to the point where it gets on the trending list, even though it's just bots. And so why is this such a big problem in South Africa? It's because South African news media and journalism has been hollowed out over the last bunch of years. You can go and watch many of our different podcasts and shows about how South African journalism is in crisis because the digital age and social media platforms and big research algorithms, search engines like Google and the rest have hollowed out advertising revenue streams that used to pay for South African journalism. And so now we have a situation where many media publishers in South Africa have closed. Many more are on their last legs with barely any money, with skeleton staff who are unable to do as much work as they need to, who are being paid very little and are expected to churn out tons and tons and tons of pieces. It's a quantity game, not a quality game. And these poor overworked journalists are also told the measure of your success is how many people read your article. And so what they are looking for is to write on stories that are already at least popular somewhere, so that they hope they can get the clicks and the reads from the people who are aware of that story from somewhere else, and therefore their articles will do well. And what that means is a lot of journalists at South African media houses are now going to Twitter to find news stories, looking on the trending lists to try and find something that they can justify to their editor as being a worthwhile news story that will get some views because it's getting some views on Twitter. Then they write the article and they give their seal of approval on the piece, the stamp, the prestige of their brand as a news media house, as a newspaper or a broadcaster, and then they publish it on their platforms on all different kinds of social media, sometimes in print, sometimes on their website, sometimes on television. And suddenly, what was once just on Twitter, a small social media platform compared to the others, is being disseminated across all of the different platforms of big legacy media. And so it's made to look like a massive news story, even though it came from Twitter, where there are very few people. Now, since Elon Musk took over Twitter, it's hard to get reliable data on who uses the platform, how many are bots, how many are inactive accounts. But so what I'm just going to do is take Elon's own team's best estimates that they tell advertisers. And remember, because this is an organization trying to convince advertisers to spend on Twitter, they've probably been very liberal and kind with themselves over their numbers. So take it with a pinch of salt. But Twitter right now claims that 4.1 million South Africans use Twitter. Now, again, many of those are probably bots, many of those are probably inactive accounts. But even if it is 4.1 million South Africans, that's still like 6.87% of our population. It's so few people. It's really so few people. So many more South Africans use Facebook and TikTok and Instagram. But the fact that it's so few South Africans means it's really easy to trend, because you just don't need that many posts to be using a specific keyword or a specific hashtag to trend on the trending list. And so with very few South African users, you can get your bot network together and you can train your bots or pay whoever's running those bots to tweet on a certain hashtag, like say, put South Africans first, or say radical economic transformation, or white monopoly capital, any of these hashtags, any hashtags really, and in a few hours, you can be trending top of South Africa's trends list. And then a desperate overworked journalist will go, okay, well, if it's trending on Twitter, I can write an article that I will then post to Twitter. So the very few people on Twitter will go and read my article because they want to know the journalist stamp of approval account of what the trend is about. But then everyone else on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and all of the other places and on the news media websites and the broadcasters will experience that story. And because it's been reported on by a massive news media house, they will think that this is a story that the whole country cares about, even though it was actually a story that a tiny number of South Africans cared about on Twitter, or even fewer South Africans cared about. It was just a bot network that got it there in the first place. And that is how South African news media, in its desperation, in its bad addiction to the dark place formerly known as Twitter, is distorting the reality of what is going on in this country and misleading many South Africans into believing that relatively minor, unpopular fringe issues or stories are actually massive stories. And it's something that South African news media needs to stop doing and needs to change. It's time we weaned ourselves off of the dark place formerly known as Twitter and go back to reporting on the news. And if you really want to report on truly popular stories, South African news media, digital stories coming from online, you should be reporting on what's happening on TikTok or Instagram or particularly Facebook, because that's where most South Africans are. So that's the issue with South African news media's bad addiction to Twitter. Thank you so much for watching.